This is Gemara Makkos, Daf Gimel. Baruch Hashem, we're trying to get the Yishirim up nice and early in advancement of Pesach to allow everyone to prepare appropriately. We like to dedicate all the learning for the yahrzeit of Miriam Bas Eliezer, which was 2 days ago, B'siyata D'Shmaya. Koyach HaTorah should continuously elevate her neshama, as well as we look ahead to the second day of Pesach. We like to dedicate today's shir. The shirim for the beginning of Pesach is an incredible schos aliyas neshama for Moshe ben Shema, the entire mishpacha, close friend of the daf, v'siyata d'shmaya, the infinite power of the koyach HaTorah should continuously elevate the neshama of Lezer Moshe ben Shema closer and closer to the kisei hakavod. And finally, we like all the learning to continue being the incredible schos refuah shalema, the schos that only the koyach HaTorah can have for Tinaik Miriam Ahuva B'siyata Dishmaya. So we're holding 3 lines on the bottom on Beis Amid Beis. Says the Gemara Mishum Rabbi Akiva Himer, quoting the Brisa above that's Rabbi Akiva added on, a 5th case in which the Eidim Zaymim would not pay, the Eidim Zaymim would not get the classical Hazama, the classical reciprocal punishment, but rather there's a different punishment. Says the Gemara, by time of Rabbi Akiva. Says the Gemara, Kasavar Kanasahu. Rabbi Akiva holds that the payment, the penalty that has to be made is a kanas. Ukanas ein mishalim al piatzmai. And you never pay a kanas al piatzmai. This is the classical klal of moide bikanas is pater. Just to scroll up for a moment, you see on the 4th very wide line, Rabbi Akiva, that if they admit on their own, there is no kanas. Why? Says the Gemara. Because the payment is a kanas. Amar Rabba, says Rabba, I'll bring you a raya. That the payment is a kanas. Teida, what's the raya? Sharilo asumaisa, they didn't do an action. And they have to get killed. This really brings out the aside of kasher zama. What is the aside? The aside is that when these Eidim testified falsely against someone else, falsely because they could not have been there, and now they are obligated to incur the wrath, the penalty, well, not really the wrath, the punishment that they tried to inflict. So whatever that punishment is, if they were potentially going to kill, they get killed. If they are going to be mechayiv someone, they have to pay. And this chiyav happens when lo yasamaisa, as we've spoken out, because it's only if that person did not pay, did not get killed. Once that person gets killed or pays, there's no din of Eidim Zaymim. So based over that, says Rabba, right, Rabbi Akiva, that any time the Eidim Zaymim will be maida. Not that they were found that other Eidim come in and say, oh, Yimanu Ayisem, you were with us, you cannot have been there. No! But rather they come in, they throw up their hands, they say, we lied, we weren't there. Moida b'kenas, says Rabbi Akiva, therefore there'll be no din of Eidim Zaymim. Amar Rav Nachman, a second raya teder, she'imam and v'yad bailim, u'mishalmin. The money is still in the hands of the owner, meaning they never actually obligated anyone, as similar to Rabba's Raya, because there's only a din of Eidim Zaymin prior to the person they were testifying actually paid. So says Rav Nachman, Mam and V'yad Bailim, and they have to pay. Clearly, it's a kinas. Says the Gemara as we turn over to Gilum and Al Mai Niu Dulasa Maisa. What does it mean? What does Rav Nachman mean to do a Maisa? Hainu de Rabba. As we pointed out, this is really the exact same Raya as Rabba. Says Gemara, you're right. Ema v'chein Amar Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman is bolstering, is saying yes, a similar, if not almost parroting the same Raya as Rabba. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yudam Rav. Eid Zaymim Mishalim Lefi Chelkoi. Says Rav Yehuda Merav, and Eid Zaymim pays Lefi Chelkoi according to his share. Says what does this mean? My Mishalim Lefi Chelkoi. If you're going to tell me that when we have 2 Eidim that are found to be Eidim Zaymim, each one pays half. Tanina, but we learned in our Mishnah, Mishalshin b'mamayin, vein Mishalshin b'malkis. We're going to see this Mishnah late in a few days, that the Mishnah taught us that the Eidim Zayimim split up cash, but they do not split up malkis. So says the Gemara, Rav Yehuda Merav is not coming to teach us a din that the Mishnah on Daf Hey teaches us. That makes no sense. Rav Yehuda Merav comes to teach us a din that you don't pay half. It has to be a unique din. Can't be the din of the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, so you know what it is. Ela kegain, what's going on over here is the Taizim Chad Minayu. What if one of the Eidim are found to be Zaymim? One of them are found that they could not have been there. The halach is the Mishal Baal Godidei, you'll only have to pay half. Says the Gemara, 1 second. Umi Mishalem, is this accurate? Says the Gemara, do you actually have to pay half? V'atanya, but we learned in a brisa. There's only a din of azam on the first place if they're both found to be zaymimim. Amar Rava ba'omer edus sheker. Says Rav, you know what's going on over here is when one of the edim says, I have testified falsely. He comes and he is maida. He says, I was never there. Whereas the other guy does not admit. So since he admits on his own, he pays, but he only pays half. Says the Gemara, Kol Keminei. Again, Amar Rav Amir the Sheker Adati. Ask the Gemara, Kol Keminei. Does he have any credibility? Him coming to say that I wasn't there. The halacha is, once one gives testimony, you cannot retract that testimony. So once he gave testimony in Bezdin, and Bezdin accepted his edus, then there's no way for him to say that he was not there, and he won't be obligated. Says the Gemara, you're right. Ella ba'ime, you know the case of Rav is he comes into Bezdin and he says, we were found to be Zaymin in a different Bezdin. Not that he stam admits that he wasn't there. No, he admits that this court case already happened and he already was found to be an Eid Zaymin. Therefore, he's not giving Eidos right now. There's no issue of Kivich Heged Shovin Chayzer Magid. You have to give Eidos again. This isn't called Eidos. He's telling us that a different Bezdin already said that he was not there, that he was an Eid Zaymin. And now the Gemara says, Kiman, to like Rav Akiva, why? Like we started today, Rav Akiva holds that if it's a kanas, Einoi Mishalim al Biatzmai, whereas here it would seem yes al Biatzmai. Ella rather says the Gemara Baimer Ha'adani. Not only did we give this Eidos before, and not only were we already found to be Zaymimim, but the prior Bezdin already convicted us, already obligated us in paying money. So he's not coming, there's no Haidah, there's no Maida B'Kenas over here, because there's no Haidah at all. He's just saying what happened. So says the Gemara, Sal Kedei Techamina, if Rav never said this, and I would have thought, he can't obligate the other guy. So you would think, maybe he cannot even obligate himself. How does he have the koyach to say, I was obligated in the previous Bezdin? Kamash Mlon, that's the Chiddush of Rabbi Yehuda Merav. So when we look at the top, 2 lines on the bottom, and Rabbi Yehuda Merav taught us, Mishalem, the case comes out to be that someone comes in and says, we already were found to be liars, already found and obligated, convicted to pay in a different Bezdin. So the Chiddush of Rav Yehuda Merav is, even though he will not have a credibility on Emanus to say this about the other guy, he will have an Emanus to say this about himself. Continue, and therefore he'll be mechayiv to pay lefi chalkai according to his portion. We continue with the Mishnah halfway down, Gimel Amid Aleph. Me'idim anu as Ishploini Shagiris as Ishtoi. Someone gives eidos that a certain person divorced his wife. V'loy nasal ksuba, but he did not yet pay her a ksuba. So basically, the eidim are testifying that this guy, this husband, is obligated to pay his ex-wife a ksuba. And then what happens? These eidim are found to be eidim zaymim. So what's the halacha? Kasher zamam. You have to give the husband the value that he was going to have given his wife. But it says the Mishnah of Haloi ben Ayayim ubein lamachar seifei litin laksuba. Says the Gemara, either today or tomorrow. But ask the Gemara, could be he'll pay the ksuba today or tomorrow. So therefore, how can we say that's what you were going to cause him the loss? Rather, oimdim kamodem roitzlitim b'ksuvasa shalzu shenisalmon iskarsha v'meisa yushenu baila. So rather, he does not have to pay the whole amount, because it could be he'll actually get divorced and he'll actually have to give his wife this amount. But rather, we evaluate how much is a person willing to pay for the rights of ksuba. Ksuba has a value to it. A husband and wife gets married, the husband obligates to give his wife $100. That paper has cash value. Why does that paper have cash value? Because someone else can take that paper, and in the event that what happens, there is a divorce, or the husband dies, then the halacha is that the woman collects the ksuba. So that's the amount, whatever that dollar value. Of course, not a full $100, because you're taking a risk. You might wait years. It might never happened. She might die first. But because you're taking the risk, there is a dollar value. That's the value that the Eidim have to pay. Says the Gemara, Ketzad Shaman, how do you evaluate? How do we estimate, or actually calculate, I should say, this value? Amar Rav Chisda, says Rav Chisda, Bibal, says Rav Chisda, that Bibal, we evaluate based on the husband. Rashi says V'isha. So we have a machlokes how we evaluate the value of the ksuba. Is it Bibal or is it B'isha? And Amar Baba B'isha u'B'ksubasa. So this is a little bit of a lengthy machlokes over here. Let's take a moment and look at Rashi. Rashi, towards the end of the medium-sized line, Rav Chisda Amar Bibal, S'chos Sfeikoi Shalbal, Oimdim Kam Adam Roitze Litin Boy, V'oisa Yitnenu Hazaymim. How much would someone give the husband? How much would someone give the Baal? That's from where? From the land. How much would someone give the husband for the land that is designated for the ksuba? Whereas if that's what Rashi says, V'isha Schus Feikam Oimdin V'oisai Lo Yishalmu V'chaymer Gadolu Etzlan. We evaluate it based on the Isha. How much would she be able to sell her ksuba for? And a Rav Papa comes along and he agrees with Rav Nassim bar Aishia, and he clarifies it that it's Isha Ubik Subasa Shaman Kiram Nasan Ubik Subasa La Yishalmenu Lai Elaha Oidevik Subasa Ladamim Alalu, how much extra it would be worth. So that's going to be the three-way machlokes. How do we evaluate what a woman's ksuba is worth? And that's what the Eidim Zaymimim are going to have to pay. And we continue with the Mishnah on the bottom of Gimel Amud Aleph. Says the Mishnah, someone's give Eidim, someone has to pay 1,000 zos. They testify that Ruvain owes Shimon 1,000 zos with a Tanai that he pays it over the next 30 days. And he says, no, I really have 10 years to pay back the 1,000 zuz. So, and then they're found to be Eidim Zaymimim. So the amount they were obligating, it's the same dollar, but it's having to pay it back within 30 days and not 10 years. So says the Mishnah, we evaluate how much would you give to have cash today. Of course, cash is worth money. How much would you evaluate to have cash today and not have to pay within 30 days versus 10 years? How much is 10 years or 9 years minus a month cash worth to a person? Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Yudah Mer Shmuel, Amal v'eschaver lesashanim, shvi'is misham tasai. Someone lends his friend for 10 years, Shemitah cancels the loan, and the person does not have to pay back at all. We turn over to Gimla Mebeis, continues the Gemara and explaining V'aval Gaf, and even though even though right now, at the beginning, we do not apply the klal of loyigois, which is the klal that you cannot collect on Shemitah. So if asli de loyigois, but at the end, it's going to come to loyigois. So Masiv Rav Kahana, ask Rav Kahana. Let's just look at Rashi for a moment. Rashi paints the picture over here. Why? You can't collect bechlal. You have a 10-year, so you can't collect today. Lo yamrino. We don't say kiman to karina be lo yigois, lo karina be shamait. So because eventually you're going to have to collect. Will still cancel that loan, even though the due date of the loan is not yet. Chiddush of the Gemara is that Shemitah will still cancel. Masiv Rav Kahana asks Rav Kahana, our Mishnah, the Mishnah says we evaluate how much would a person give to have the cash in his hand for 10 years. But says the Gemara, 1 second, asks Rav Kahana, how many of you going to tell me Shvi's Misham Dasai? If Shemitah what is going to cancel the halva, then you'd have to pay everything. Because what would their false eidos have done? He would have forced them to repay the entire loan. So why does the Mishnah not obligate him that, but rather the Mishnah obligates him to pay the difference between 30 days and 10 years? Or in 2 different cases in which Shemitah will not be Meshamet, Shemitah will not cancel the loan. Shemitah is not Meshamet those cases, and therefore he's not obligating him in the whole loan. Igadi Amri, a second Lashon, Rav Yudah Mer Shmuel, Mavaz Chaver Leser Shanim, Ein Shvis Meshamet Tasai. V'avagav the Aslei Ligos eventually, V'ashtamiyah Lekrin Ligos, the exact opposite. Amar Rav Kahana, Avanan, Nami Tanin, I'll bring you a raya now. Now our Mishnah is out of Kasha, now our Mishnah is a raya. I think come on the rest of the Elef says, Be other Ben Litin Mikanvar Lami Yoim, Ben Litin Mikanvar Shanim, V'amrid, and if it's true that the loan would be cancelled, she's from Tazakul and Nami, but you have to pay the whole thing. Lay. Amar Rav and Orayach, my skin of Maval Mashkin, Moses Rasul Bezdin, Tan Maval Mashkin, Moses Rasul Bezdin, Ein Mishamtin, and therefore there's not going to be a raya from here. Va'amar Rav Yudah Mer Shmuel, 12 lines in the medium-sized line. The first line is Va'amar, a new din. If someone gives his money a loan and says the Kaddish that Shemitah does not cancel the loan, still the halacha is Shemitah is Mishameta. Shemitah, of course, cancels the loan. Leima Kasavar Shmuel's din Rav Yudah Mer Shmuel. So I asked the Gemara, should we say that Shmuel holds Matana Masta Mashikos Batayru? You're making a Tanai Keneged the Torah. The Torah says that Shemitah comes and cancels the loan. You're trying to say not, and therefore, v'chol masna, that's the reason why Tanai is going to be batal. But ask the Gemara, but if this is true, v'yitmar, Rav says, yesh lavana, u'shmuel amer, so Shmuel says, even though it's seemingly connected to what the Torah says, still the fact that he agrees to Tanai means that it will work. So why shouldn't the same thing be by us? Explains the Gemara. It's a chilik between a lie or a boy in it. Then a reish bayana. Hachanami amanash loitish v'teni shviyas ein shviyas v'sham tasai. Amanash loitish v'teni shviyas shviyas v'sham tasai, and therefore there's no kasha from over here. One last din, Tana, says the Gemara. We are on the third medium-sized line. Tana. Ha'amalves chavirei stam, someone lends his friend money stam. Einai rashi l'tava, you're not allowed to go and ask him for the money back. Pachos milamid yom. So Savar Rabbi Chana Kamei de Rav Lemeim Arhani Mili b'malve b'shtar. To love it in Shtar because the shtar bought some talsin yaimin. So if there's alva b'shtar, then we assume that it for sure was at least a 30-day alva. Aval malva al peh loy. But if a milva al peh, then we can say that no one would lend for less than 30 days. Therefore, you could collect even prior to that. Amar le Rav Achi Amar Chavivi Echad Amalva Bishtar Ve'Echad Amilva Al Peh. Both of them have the same halacha. You cannot collect until 30 days. Tanami Hachi Araya Amav Choyer Stamin Ershel Tove Bakus Mishlishim Yoim Echad Amilva Bishtar Ve'Echad Amilva Al Peh. Bryce is saying explicitly, like we just said, that irregardless to whether it's Bishtar or whether it's Al Peh, the halacha is you have a 30-day time window. We conclude, Amr le Shmuel Rav Nasna, Loi tiyasev akarich ad mafarsh lei la lahashemaitza. Says Shmuel to Rav Nasna, don't sit down till you explain to me the halacha. Menah hanim milsa, where do we know this halacha? Damar rabbanim avos chaveres tamin arshel tavach sham yoyim. Echad milva b'shar v'echad milva peh. Explain it to me. Amr le, he explains the chsev. Karva shasa sheva shasa shmita. It's getting close. So why did the Torah explicate Shna Shmita? To teach you, Yeshmita Cheresh He Kazu Vezezu Amafas Chaveres Tam Shinamash Latava Bachas Meilamid Yom. You cannot collect more than 30 days, less than 30 days. Why the Ramar? Shleishiv Yom B'Shana Chashiv Shana. Therefore, any 30 days, whether Milva Al Peh Milva B'Shtar, that will be the lach. It will be a minimum of a 30-day halva. Stop over here. I'll pick it up for the next dinner of Rav Yehuda Merav, the second wide line of the next year, Amirza Hashem.